again. Well, I've got this painting back in the studio now after getting maybe halfway done out on the Snoqualmie Middle Fork River. So I've got a reference photo from that night here on my iPad. I've got the brightness turned down about halfway. I like to keep the brightness a little bit low, otherwise I'm chasing the brightness of the screen in my paintings when I use a reference photo. I've got the painting up here, so I like the sky. I like how loose it is and how light it is compared to the reference photo. The reference photo, that sky is just kind of a flat cerulean blue, maybe a hint of warm alizarin crimson over here, but otherwise just kind of boring. Whereas the sky I painted, which was matching what I was seeing out there, has all kinds of shifts in tone. You can see some light pale yellow, you can see some even cad red hints in the sky from the painting. It's very loose, I want to keep it that way, but I do need to add just a little bit of wet paint. This is really dry to the touch now. It's been a couple weeks since I was out there, so I need to add just a little bit of wet paint along the edge of the mountain so that I can correct the edge of the mountain just a little bit. I like the colors in general in the painting that I captured, so I don't want to lose that. And I've modified the reference photo a little bit to try to match my memory, and to match the colors in the painting. The reference photo straight up is kind of washed out, just a bluish overall tone, whereas my painting that I created on site is much warmer. It has a lot more warmth in the trees, a lot more warmth in the mountain, and I want to keep that. So I've actually tweaked the reference photo to try to match what I have in my painting here and what I remember of that night. I want to keep this little passage a little lighter than what I have in the reference photo. There was light hitting the river that I want to keep, and there was a kind of a pool of nice green here that night. So I'm going to rewatch the videos I took while I was out there painting on site and make sure I capture the best moment for this painting. That's what I want to capture here. I've got a great memory, I've got a lot of reference photos, and I've got the video, so I can go back and refresh my memory and try to finish it and capture that one perfect moment from that night, the feeling of being out there on the river. So first up, I'll mix up some colors based on the reference photo and mainly based on my painting from on site. I'll add a little bit of color to the sky, and then I'll go back and just touch up the mountain. I'll leave this pretty much as is. I want to darken the shadow just a bit. I want to correct the edge of the mountain here just a bit. And I want to lighten and correct this edge and this value and tone here. I want this to be more of a lavender tone. And then I'll slowly move forward and I'll move down the painting to finish it. As always, thanks so much for joining me. If you like these videos, please like and subscribe. I'll start by scraping down the painting. I want to remove any bugs, any dust, any thick ridges of paint before I start painting. After scraping the painting down, I'll take a clean piece of t-shirt cloth and rub in some refined linseed oil. That's only necessary if the painting is fully dry, hard to the touch. I only need to rub in the oil where I've painted over the underpainting. I don't need to oil in the underpainting. Alright, I've got my normal colors laid out. Cerulean blue, cobalt blue, phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, which are really a light blue and a darker blue, a cool blue and a warmer blue. Cool blue, warmer blue. And you can see I like my blues. I can create just a bunch of different greens and grays with those blues, which are really important out here in the Pacific Northwest. Sap green, burnt umber, burnt sienna, alizarin crimson, cad red, cad yellow lemon, and radiant yellow, and yellow ochre. I've got a couple colors mixed up from a previous session that I might dip into. Since I always use these same colors and pretty much the same brands, I can easily grab from pre-mixed paints. It helps me to save paint. Titanium white, a little bit of medium that I mix up. This medium kind of changes. It's a quarter stand oil, a quarter Gamsol, a quarter walnut alkyd, and a quarter Dorland wax. This is also Dorland wax here, and a little bit of liquid. So I may or may not use these. I may put just a little bit of Dorland wax into any of the really light finishing highlights to give it a nice flat impasto effect. Alright, I'll start with the sky color. I'll mix up just a little bit to re-wet basically the edge of that mountain so I can correct the drying on the edge of the mountain. Okay, that's pretty close. It's just a hair too cool. I need to add just a little bit of alizarin crimson, I think, to bring a more red tone to the blue in the sky. And then I'll mix up this lighter, more yellowish value as well, and a little bit of a warmth over here. I may achieve that by just adding the smallest amount of cad red as I'm painting. As you may know from watching some of my previous videos, I like to use this value scale. So for the sky I want to keep the value very high, very light. So I'm going to try to keep all the sky colors in these lightest value families here. That way the contrast will be greater with the foreground and with the areas in shadow. If I keep those, compress those toward the darker end of the scale, make for a more dramatic scene. I have the colors mixed up for the distant mountains now. I've got this darkest value in the nearer mountain with a slightly bluer cast for lower on that mountain, and then a set of colors for the further back mountains. It seems like a lot of colors, but I've got these grouped in values and a couple main colors, and I just grabbed a couple piles of some of the colors as they shifted as I was mixing them. Just a little bit of green for the forest on that furthest back mountain, a little bit of a light value for the highlights on the rocks on that furthest mountain. I'll start with this small rosemary, ivory, filbert, just to draw the profile, the silhouette of the mountains, and then I'll switch to a little larger brush. Just like I do when I'm painting outdoors, I'm stepping back from the panel, back from the painting 5 or 6 feet pretty often, just to compare how does it look from a distance. That helps to see big groups of values. It helps to see the big shadow on the left side of the mountain and the highlight on the right. And I try to group those into as big a shape as I can and as simple a shape as I can. Stepping back, maybe even squinting a little bit at your painting will help you You can squint at the photo to see those big groups, and then you can squint at your painting to see if it's coming across, reading the same. Making those big shapes will help your painting read well. I like the value pattern I have now. I like the lavender, relatively light shadows on the left-hand side of the mountain away from the sun, and these warm, kind of earthy tones on the right-hand side, picking up the highlights in the rocks. Now I just want to take this long, flat brush from Rosemary & Co. It's a 0, so it's pretty small. It's got a nice, long, soft hair to it. I just want to hint at the trees on that far mountain. I'll take this long brush and just softly brush it across that wet paint to hint at trees. Now I have a set of colors mixed up for that mid-ground mountain. In the painting I did on that day outdoors, I think because the light was changing, I captured a very green hilltop there. I don't quite like that. I think it needs to be brought down. It can stay slightly green, but I want to tone it down and make it a little more blue, a little more lavender, which will push it back. And it will also be a nice contrast against the foreground fall colors. Per usual, I'm starting dark and then work toward the lighter values. So the shadows go first and then the highlights last. You may also notice that on the top of that middle ground ridge, where the light is hitting the shadow, there's a warmth. There's a warmth there that is probably coming from the sun hitting some of the bark of the trees and maybe the red of the pine needles on the ground. I'll use this big soft brush and dilute it with add just a little bit of Gamsol and hit the edges. And I won't blend everywhere. I don't want the painting to be all over soft, but for the background, the distant hills, the edges between light and shadow, I don't want those to be hard edges. I don't want the eye to be seeing a lot of detail at that distance. Here you can see I have the colors mixed up now for those trees on the far bank of the river. And again, I've banded them into value families. So the darkest values here. I may dip in just a little bit to these darkest darks. This is the darkest I can mix. I don't use a black. I mix my blacks from my normal palette of colors. So the darkest darks I can mix. I've got kind of a reddish hue dark, a straight up black, as hue free as I can get, just straight up black, slightly green, slightly blue, and then I've grouped these value families for the colors that I see in the scene. Just like in your normal vision, here I want the eye drawn to that middle band of bright fall colored trees first, and then the reflections on the water next as they come toward you, and then circle around and climb up the tree shadows and into the distant hills. So I want the interesting edges, the soft edges, the hard edges to play a role. I want those edges to lead the eye around the painting while also making a convincing illusion of depth. For parts of the leaves, especially the furthest back middle ground trees where the sunlight is hitting those bright leaves, I'm using this number 2 rosemary long filbert. It's a series 279, really soft, really loose. If I get just a little bit of paint on the tips of the hairs of the brush and then lightly touch the panel, it leaves just a dot of paint. So if I do that holding the paintbrush at the very end of the handle so that I get a nice kind of chaotic movement of the brush, I think it comes out nicely. If I'm too careful, if I try to draw too carefully, it looks kind of boring. All the leaves, all the branches end up looking the same, and I don't want that. I want there to be some variety. Now to add a little more randomness, a little more abstraction, I'm using the palette knife. It's a medium-sized Italian palette knife. I'm just adding some tree trunks in different brightness levels and different hues, warm and cool. Where I think the sun is hitting it, it's going to be bright and warm. Where it's in the shadow, it's going to be darker and cooler. And then I'm also just throwing in some shadow with the knife as well. I like the way it creates a broken pattern. Again, it's just abstraction. I'm not trying to copy exactly what I see in the photo. I'm just kind of playing in small areas with the knife, getting different marks. There's a balance here. There's a point where you can go too far and it all looks like a palette knife painting, which I don't care for. I like my palette knife to be just in specific areas and not overall, just to give some variety. I'm stepping back often and looking at the picture overall just to make sure I'm not diving too far down into detail in any one place. You know, if it looks good at about 6 foot, then it can look pretty messy up close and still achieve what I'm after. keep playing with those trees forever. It's fun. Maintaining the abstraction, going back and forth from the foreground to the background, adding branches, hinting at fallen logs, adding highlights behind the dark foreground trees. I mean, it's fun. But I don't want to overwork it, so I'm going to stop while I feel like I could still do more. And that's usually a good stopping point for me, is when I feel like just a few more strokes and I'll have it perfect. That's the time to stop, because I'm never going to achieve perfection. It's just it's always how close can you get without killing it. So this has become the center of interest, this brightest clump of leaves. I like how it's peeking out behind those darker pine trees. I'll have a nice path in the water leading from that. I want to try to make the brushwork also lead you in this closer bank of rocks. I want the brush strokes and the lay of the rocks lead to that point of interest. So I'm going to move into the water. I'm going to mix up a few light green, emerald green values where the sun is hitting the water. And then I'll move forward, and as the scene comes forward, the water gets this beautiful bright lavender and very pale yellow color. Lots of gradient between the sky blue and the lavender that I'm seeing in the scene. I want to add the rocks on the closer bank there as well. Those are warmer, and that warmth will help to bring them forward. Again, I don't want to be too detailed, since that's not the center of interest. I want to keep that very abstract, very loose. I don't want to paint each rock. I want to hint at piles of rocks of different sizes. I'm going to try to use my brush strokes as well. I'm going to angle my brush strokes toward the center of interest, which is that brightest clump of fall leaves. Continue to do the rocks on that middle ground bank across the river from me. I want to suggest the rocks. I don't want to paint each and every rock separately. So I'll use this knife to drag along in the far distance just to create an abstract pattern, and then take a small pointed brush and just hit some shadows and some highlights and try to call it good. Maintain an overall color field, an overall tone to that distance, middle and close foreground rocks, and as the rocks get closer, then I'll add more detail. continue with the water. I've got the bank of rocks to a point where I think the value's right. The shapes could be adjusted a little bit. Soften some edges, add some edges. I've got the kind of under painting, if you will, a second under painting of the water, which is the colors of the trees reflected. And it's kind of going down. It's really blended smooth and it's going down. Now I'm going to paint across. I'll add some dark shadows first, and then I'll add the blue color of the sky that's reflected in the ripples on the water. There are some gentle rapids in the river that are reflecting the blue of the sky. I don't want that to be anywhere near as bright as the actual sky. All of this foreground close to me, where I'm standing and painting, is in shadow. I want to maintain that shadow, so it's going to remain pretty dark except for where the bright leaves of the trees are reflecting in the water. So I need that nice sky blue, but a darker value than the actual sky. Well, here's the finished painting. I tried to keep the level of abstraction and simplification as high as I could in this one. So the water is a lot of smoothing with a palette knife to get just a very abstract take on what I'm seeing in the water, which are those reflections of the trees going down and the sky reflected on the ripples going across. The rocks on the bank of the river are just kind of a jumble of suggested colors and edges. I tried not to really put too much detail into any one rock. Same thing with these trees. Catching the light. Pretty rough brushwork, but when you step back, the illusion kind of comes together. And I like the lavender, green, yellow, green, yellow, blue, lavender. I like that kind of spectrum of color. That color combination really suggests late summer to me, early fall, which is what I was after. I'm going to set it aside and live with it a little bit and make sure I like it. Thanks so much for joining me. If you like these videos, please like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time.